All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. We've got lots of people tuning in from all over the country, which is so awesome. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to let Autumn kick us off here.
Yeah, hi everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us as we continue our webinar series featuring our ADI hacks for investigations in the hybrid and virtual classroom. Today's webinar is hack number 5, writing assessments for ADI. This webinar will be recorded and posted on our website as well as our social media platforms for later viewing or sharing. If you haven't already, please follow us on Twitter, which you can see in the lower left-hand corner of the screen to interact with ADI and our community. My name is Autumn Lenartz. I'm the Assistant Program Coordinator here at ADI. I'll be in the chat and monitoring the Q&A, so if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to post them there. Facilitating our webinar today is Carrie Burt, our PL Specialist and Instructional Designer. We're going to review how you can interact with us throughout the webinar. At the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A icon where you can submit your questions. Your question could be selected to be answered live at the end of the webinar during the Q&A section. If this is the case, we'll mark your question as answered live. We'll also be taking additional questions in a bit more of an informal setting after we end the session. And the chat function allows you to chat with each other throughout the webinar. As always, we're going to be sharing a lot of ideas really quickly, but this webinar will be recorded and posted to the website as well as emailed out to everyone that registered. Any links that we share during the webinar are going to be available in the webinar notes page, which you can find at this link. Be aware that it is case sensitive, and Carrie just put that in the chat for you guys. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Carrie.
Awesome. Thanks, Autumn. Well, welcome in, everybody. We're so glad you're here. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. We've just been getting so many questions lately about assessment in general, and especially in a virtual setting. But we wanted to, because I think a lot of people are starting to at least think about transitioning back to more of a traditional classroom setting, we did want to focus on a little bit broader view of assessment. So we'll talk a little bit about some virtual assessment options, but I wanted to give you a good, strong foundation. Obviously, this is we're going to talk for 20 minutes, 30 minutes maybe. So it's going to be quick. We do have a workshop coming up in May that's going to do much more of a deep dive into all of this, but I wanted to get some information out now while it's relevant as we're getting ready for testing season and all of that, that teachers are not limiting themselves on how they're assessing students just because there's a test coming up. So a couple things we're going to be going through today, some big picture considerations for assessments, and then more specifically, some steps for writing assessments for ADI, or really any topic, but just keeping it three-dimensional, focusing on not just the content. At the end of this session, we'll have a live Q&A, but feel free to type questions into that Q&A box as you think of them. And there will be times in here where I'd love if you type in the chat as well. So the first thing you need to consider when you're trying to come up with an assessment is what kind of feedback is going to be most appropriate. Sometimes I think because different school districts have grade requirements, sometimes teachers think that that's what they need to be doing. And assessment is important, but like grades specifically aren't always the answer. And so we want to, I don't want this to necessarily be like how you get a bunch of grades. We have a whole nother webinar on that we did a summer or two ago called Grading Strategies for ADI. This is going to be more, how do you write a good, solid assessment? Because grades are just one piece of that puzzle. What I really want to dig in on is, what are you assessing? That's going to be such an important thing. And what teachers tend to jump to is, I'm going to assess how much they know the content. That's so important. That's a huge piece of what we have to do as educators, but that's not the whole picture of a student. We have the ideas in their head. We need to know about that, but we also need to know, how are you doing at the practices in this field, whether that's science or math or engineering or history or language, like how are you doing at actually doing the practices here? And then also the actions, and that's going to be, practices and actions could be a little bit similar, but we like to think of the actions as being more of those soft skills. There might be times when you want to assess a student's ability to work in a group with other students or communicate their findings verbally. That's something that's important. And a lot of times we as educators just hyper focus in on that ideas section. And I want to give you an opportunity as we talk through this to think about a little bit broader view of student thinking. Another thing to think about is why you're giving a particular assessment. So there are different levels of assessment, ranging from specific to the student, like an assessment for learning kind of situation where it's, what feedback can I give you? How can I design this task to help you learn something as you're doing the task, ranging all the way up to evaluative, where it's really stepping back and looking at yourself as the teacher and thinking, is what I'm doing working? And there's steps in the middle of that. So the way that you are, like what you're hoping to do with that data once you get it is going to influence how you write the assessment. For today, we're going to focus mostly on this formative assessment idea, thinking about, okay, where are they now? And then how do I get them to the next step? So sort of that diagnostic and formative assessment, that's where the ADI process sort of thrives. I know some schools will use ADI as more of a summative, but we see it as fitting into that diagnostic formative so that you can take that visible student thinking that you've gotten and do something with it to help them learn and grow. This is going to be the fastest tool review ever. If you look on the notes page, I've listed all of these out, but it is important to think about how you're going to deliver whatever the assessment is. And there are a million tech tools out there. This is like such a drop in the bucket of all of the ones. There was no way I was going to be able to list every possible tech tool. What I want you to think about, though, is it's not necessarily the tool itself that is important, it's what you want to do with it. And so there are all kinds of things out there, but what tool you use is going to be dependent on the kinds of questions you want to ask. Is it going to be more open-ended? Is it going to be more of a performance assessment? Is it going to be multiple choice? That's going to affect which tool is the best one to use. Another thing to think about with this is what kind of analysis you need to do. Sometimes you just need a really quick, glance and to see, okay, they got this many right. Sometimes you want to do a more deep dive, and different tools are going to have different capabilities there. So just keep that in mind when you're picking. And the last one is the type of feedback you want to be able to give students. So there are some tools out there that are really designed around feedback from peers and feedback from the teacher. And there are other tools that are designed more for feedback to be given, but not necessarily in the platform. And so those are 3 quick things to kind of think about when you're picking the tech tool of your dreams for whatever your assessment is. What I really want to focus on for the rest of this time here is how are you assessing? So not which tech tool you use, because that comes later, really. It's how are you going to put this thing together? We know that good assessment is just a snapshot of where a student is at any given point. But in order to get a good snapshot, it's pretty tough to figure out how you figure out what's happening in a kid's head, right? We want all of our assessments to just be amazing and do that, but it turns out there's a ton of implicit bias in different assessment types. And so that's really hard. What we are hoping to do is help make student thinking visible by having them do a task. So all of these assessments, all these assessments and exit tickets I'm going to be kind of talking through and how you write them, they're task-based, because we see that as a way to help back out from just ideas and help you get into their practices and their actions. That will give you information that you can then use to make decisions about what you do next, which is the main point of a formative assessment. So story time. Imagine this is your class. Aren't they cute? So cute. And you want to figure out what they know. You've been going through a unit and you're like, cool, I need to see how you're doing. So you give them a test and you are amazing and you actively monitor and you do not get on your computer and you stare at all of them and you know they've really done it, although this girl right here is possibly looking at this girl's answer, but whatever, you fixed it in the moment, all that. And this is what you get back. You get a big old Scantron full of multiple choice answers, and you put it into a spreadsheet. My question is, what what are some inferences you can make based on this kind of information? And then what are some limitations? And you're welcome to just sort of rhetorically think about that, or you can type it in the chat if you'd like. To me, this tells me that maybe I need to check in with student 3 because something is going on there. That, you know, the majority of my students are kind of all over the place in what they got right and wrong. But it doesn't tell me specifics of what they know and don't know. And a lot of times for kids, this is what they get back. They get back, oh, I got a 58. I am terrible at this subject. Cool, great lesson, right? We want more for them and we want more for you out of assessment. This can't be what kids get back or they don't ever, I don't know, it just kind of sucks the joy out of them. So the other problem is we can't make valid inferences off of a number of multiple choice questions. Like it's just really hard to get there. It's going to be more helpful if we can get some useful observations. Here's what I mean by that. So this is a genetics assessment, genetics task. The students are asked about 2 heterozygous parents and then ask what the offspring are going to look like with the cross of those 2 parents. So they've been given 4 different answers, different, you know, hypothetical students have answered, and they have to ask who they or answer who they agree with. This student has said Adam. Just based on that, I know that this student can either correctly guess, you know, like process of elimination, they can guess, but I don't know if they were guessing between 2 good answers. I don't know, maybe they just randomly circled and happened to be right. But they did get it. What I can do to make this a little better is say, okay, well, what strategy did you use to find that answer? And then if they have to do that, that gives me more information as the teacher. So they said I used a Punnett square and then I shaded all the dominant squares to find the percentages. Cool. They didn't guess. That's awesome. That gives me more information as an educator. But outside of this one situation, I want to know, do you really get it? And so what we like to do is add one more question, which is, why does this work? Why does a Punnett square do this correctly? And this student answered, I never really did understand this concept, but it's fun. I will tell you that like 100% of my 7th graders, when we did Punnett squares, would have also given that answer. They were just like, I love Punnett squares. I don't get them, but I like them a lot, right? That tells me so much more than just, can you give me a right answer? And that's the kind of thing we want teachers and we want students to be able to do is dig in on concepts, quickly get good information on what kids know and don't know, not have it be some whole thing where it takes 47 years to grade, but just a little more information to help you build out your knowledge base so that you can make good instructional decisions. So useful observations come from well-designed tasks, and the model that I'm going to put forth for you today is called evidence-centered design. So here's what that looks like. We want evidence that of what a student knows, right? That's the big goal of an assessment, is to get evidence. So we're going to make observations about the answers that they give to a task, and then we're going to interpret those, maybe using scores or a rubric or something like that. The evidence-centered part of it is that if that's our end goal, then in order to make that happen well, we need to figure out what we want them to know, and we need to design a task that's actually going to have that be valid, that the observations we're making and the analysis that we're doing actually tie back to our ability to make that claim. And so when I first heard about this whole thing, I was like, well, that seems cool, but like, how do you do that? And we have a series of steps that really break it down and make it pretty straightforward. The first step for this is to figure out your claim. What is it that you need to know? And you can go into your performance expectations. If you're not in an NGSS state, maybe you call them content standards, but you're going into whatever the standards say the kids need to know and unpacking that. So it's written a lot of times as a claim about what students need to be able to know or do, but sometimes they're pretty dense, you know that. There's those clarification statements and assessment boundaries, and there's like something written on a website somewhere that you're supposed to know about, or it's way up at the top in the thing. So it is important as we're thinking about this, not just to go off of that one line of the performance expectation, but to really dig in and think about it. The next thing you do is, okay, here's what I want them to know. Decide what it is you're going to need to see in order to say, yes, they can do that, or no, they can't. That will tell you what you need to create, right? So we want to be able to make a logical leap between the task we've given them and being able to absolutely say yes or no, they know this or they don't. And that's where this step kind of comes in. So this particular performance expectation says to develop and use a model to describe how the total number of atoms does not change in a chemical reaction, and thus mass is conserved. If we break that down, that's going to be things like law of conservation of matter. That's going to be being able to tell, not necessarily to balance, but being able to tell if a chemical formula is balanced. It's not necessarily going to go crazy in depth, but if we're looking at any kind of assessment, we want to be thinking, is this what we need to see? Is it enough? Does that give me all the information I need, or is it just a piece of that pie? And then does it do everything I need it to do for me to be able to say, yes, they can do that, or no, they can't? Once you know what you're looking for, then you come up with a task. So what we like to do is come up with a scenario, some kind of phenomenon to describe for them, and then ask them to do something with it. So we give them prompts or questions to ask them to analyze it or create something. And here's an example of this on the right. So it's got a density investigation here. They've got two different chemicals. They mix them into a tub, and then 3 minutes later, it's separated out, and there's now a C and a D here. It gives them the information about the density and solubility of those different chemicals, and it asks them, was a new substance created? And so they have to use what they know about physical and chemical changes and properties of matter to figure out if a new substance was created or not, and how they know. That is going to give you better information than just because it's scenario based, because it's sort of similar to what they might have seen like in an ADI investigation. That doesn't take a lot of time. That's a great exit ticket, right? Read this one little scenario, or a warm up, honestly, read this one little scenario and answer this one question. But from that, you get so much more information than just one multiple choice question. Just the act of adding, how do you know, tells you so much more. That to me was like cool, but also daunting to come up with those. And again, we don't have time to get into all of this, unfortunately, but if you want to come join me in May, we're doing a workshop that's like dig in. I'll help you write assessments. We'll go through and peer review them and all of that. But that leads to, we created templates for different performance expectations. So we've got things for like creating plans, for developing models, all the different science and engineering practices. Basically, we have templates that you can use depending on which one you're focusing on. So if the performance expectation says develop and use a model to do blah blah, then you can go to the develop and use models template and find a task that makes sense for that particular kind of information. I've put one of these in the notes page for you, just a template for models. They all sort of follow the same basic standard. So it always starts with describe some kind of observable event. And then sometimes it's, sometimes it is ask them a scenario question from that. Sometimes it is asking them to, like the model one, some of them, it gives the model and asks the students to tweak it. Sometimes you could give like an explanation and ask the students to come up with their own model. There's lots of different ways to go about it, but that basic idea stands regardless of which performance expectation, regardless of which science and engineering practice. Always start with an observable event and then ask the students prompts or questions to process that in some way to make their thinking visible for you so that you can then make that claim. Yes, they know it, or no, they don't. Another thing to do here is come up with a rubric so that you can quickly and easily score this, because grading is a beast. We all know that. It can take a lot of time, and the more that you can think through beforehand what it might look like if they do or don't understand something, the quicker the grading is going to go for you. We don't need this to be a 17 box, I guess it would never be 17, 16 box rubric with everything in the world on it. But just keep it to 4 levels. They can do all of the things that I want them to do. They can use the cross-cutting concept and the core idea to explain their thinking, or all the way down to they didn't successfully use the cross-cutting concept or the core idea to explain their thinking, and some combination of those. That's kind of how we think about these rubrics, as a way to quickly grade them, because even though this is more in depth than just giving them a big multiple choice or a 10 question multiple choice quiz and then giving them a grade back real fast, it's going to take longer to grade these, but you still need feedback to get back to kids quickly. And so this is an easy way to do that. As part of that, you also want to go back to that levels of purpose for investigations. The kind of feedback you're giving kids as you're going through and grading these is going to be different based on what they're doing. It may be sometimes for assessments, like in my own classroom, sometimes I didn't even grade it. I just had them do it themselves and then sit with a peer and talk about, what did you do? Well, why did you do that? Oh, I put this answer. Oh, here was what I was saying for my reasoning. It's a little different than what you said, and kind of have it be an opportunity again for them, that educative level where it's like, this is for you. I don't particularly care what you got on this. It's for you so you can learn. I might look at it later so I can make some choices, but there's other times when I need to know, I'm going to really dig in and I'm going to pull data and I'm going to analyze like crazy and make spreadsheets out of how everyone did so that I can see how I'm doing, right? That rubric either way helps you to do that work. It helps your student to quickly see, yes, I could do all the pieces that I needed to do. And it can help you as you're analyzing data, bigger picture, to quickly say, all right, I had this student, they were coming at me on a level 1, like they were successful in one piece, but not the other. And then, over the course of this unit, now they're answering questions at a level 3. That's awesome. I've showed growth. That's such a big piece of what we want to do, but we want to keep it simple for you. So that little rubric is pretty helpful. Next thing you want to do after you've got your assessment, you've written it, you've got your, rubric together, what it should look like, then you're going to go back and compare it to this model. So I don't like to do this by myself. Every time I write one of these, I like to get a peer to look at it, so that they are able to, you can't catch everything, right? So I like to create it and then show it to somebody who knows my subject area, even if they don't necessarily teach it, to be like, hey, do you think this task is going to help me make this claim? Do you think that this task is going to give me the observations and the analysis and all of that I need to be able to make a claim about whether students know where are the holes in this, what do I need? And there's a rubric that you can use. I put one piece of it at the end of your notes page down there on systematic bias. There's a whole big rubric to it, and that's something we'll go into in that bigger workshop, but you can come up with your own. It doesn't have to be something super formal. Just have a moment where you're like, hey, does this actually do what I want it to do? Or is it enough? Is it doing all of the things? Or do I need to come up with a second assessment type question to really get a good picture of what they understand? The last step in here is to think through and see if there's anything that's going to lead to systematic bias. Writing assessments is so hard. None of this is easy. And bias it creeps in. Even with the best of intentions, bias is going to creep in. And so we think of there being sort of random errors. There's going to be little things that you just can't account for, but there are lots of things that that make it really difficult to tell if you're assessing a student's understanding of the content or if you're assessing their ability to navigate a test. And at the end of the day, what we want to know is, can you do this performance expectation, right? Not can you wade through all of the tricks that I've thrown in. That doesn't give you that much help. That's not very helpful as far as getting them ready for the real world or any of that. We want to know, do you understand the ideas? Can you do the practices? Are your, all of that. So yeah, there's some things to look out for. I've put a few here. I've got them all on that rubric on page, I think it's on page 4 of your notes page. There's a lot of different things to look for, but here are a few. You want your answer choices to be as short as possible and all the same length. That's just good test design. We don't want to be testing students' reading level at the same time that we are testing their science knowledge. We want to know if they know the science, right? Or the math or the whatever. Leaving out the all of the above and none of the above option is pretty helpful. That's another one where it just becomes a big logic puzzle for them and isn't about whether I think those are easy to write for teachers. And so sometimes that's why we go for it. That's our low hanging fruit, is you can't think of some good distractors. And so you're just like, I don't know, all the above. I've been there, but it's not necessarily good task design. Not having multiple choice. So this thing over here on the right where you've got 1 and 2 or 3 and 4 or just 4 or all of the above and none of the above. There's a whole world of things to fix in this one particular question. And then if possible, organize your answer choices alphabetically. Again, this is a small piece of a much larger whole, we could have a whole day on systematic bias, but just a few quick look fors for you. So I know that was so fast. Again, come hang out with me in May. I would love to see you, but I hope that gives you at least something to kind of chew on and think about as far as writing assessments. It's not necessarily about the tech tool. And even though we're all in virtual world and we're hungry for ideas on tech tools, I tried to throw some in there, but at the end of the day, is your task aligned to what you're trying to decide about what students know? And so these steps can really help you to dig in on that. Again, if you were out at the beginning, you can get the notes page for this that I was referring to by going to bit.ly/ADI-hack5. It is actually a capital H on here. There you go. So it is case sensitive, but you can check that out there. If you have any questions, it'd be awesome. I see we've already got one in Q&A, but if you have any questions about assessment or exit tickets or any of that, love if you type it in that Q&A. While you guys are working on that, I'm going to run through a few things. This is the workshop I was talking about. So you'll get 16 different templates for different types of assessments. I think it might actually be more than that. Yeah, it's a lot. But for every kind of performance or every kind of science and engineering practice, we've got like 5 or 6 templates that you can use. You'll get an opportunity to work with other teachers from around the country to write assessments and get feedback on that assessment during that workshop. And then we see this as being good for teachers, but also for like district curriculum writers and that kind of thing. I'm going to type the link to the notes page in the chat real fast. Oh, hang on. I think I have to put the okay. I think that is the correct link. Yes, that got you there. Cool. Another thing that we like to do is have teachers come join us for Facilitator Institute. So we've got one coming up this summer in Dallas, Texas. 2 things going on there: an introduction to ADI Facilitator Institute that will give you the skills and the licenses and all of that to roll ADI introduction training out to your teachers. And then also a coaching institute that's awesome for any teachers who are, or district leaders who are responsible for supporting others as they're working on ADI. We've got a lot of great resources for you in that one. Our next webinar is going to be general advice for implementing ADI. It's coming up on April 13th, and we'll do that at 4 o'clock Central again. And then just wanted to show you where you can find about other professional learning opportunities that are coming up. If you go to professional learning and then this little event drop down, that's got all of our registration events that'll be primarily virtual, other than that one Train the Trainer. We've got asynchronous courses, and then you can also schedule us to come out and do workshops for your district. Another thing we're really excited about is our ADI online platform. That's a platform where students can run through the entire ADI investigation entirely in one browser-based location, so they don't have to go to a million different websites. We do have a demo for that. If you're interested in reading more about it or hearing more about it, you can email howdy@argumentdriveninquiry.com, and we will get you some more information about that. And then, of course, follow us on social media. Just to give you a little taste of what we've been doing lately, we've come up with theme days. So we have Student Work Wednesday, where I'll post pictures of the whiteboards and pictures of student samples, writing samples, proposals, and it's things that you can put up in front of your students as a warm-up or an exit ticket and help kind of build their skills around ADI outside of any particular investigation. We have Tip Tuesday, where we'll post about research or other ideas, and then also Thoughtful Thursday, where every week we post a link to a new news article that could be used as a phenomena along with questions that you can use. So you can follow us on Twitter at Argument Driven. Love to see you there. We have 2 Facebook groups, a main one that you can find at facebook.com/argument driven, and then a second one that's a closed group just for teachers where you can ask and answer questions. And of course, we're on YouTube. We have tons of videos and content there. All right, that is that. I see we got a couple of questions. Autumn, what do we have?
Yeah, so first one, if you had to pick one, what is more helpful for students in your opinion, do nows or exit tickets?
I mean, I really like exit tickets just because it helps. I think for me, it gives me a chance to process it a little bit. I think there's lots of people that love the do nows, but if I had to just pick one, I think it would be the exit ticket just because I can I have time to process it a little bit, but I mean, there's totally benefits to both.
Okay, next question, thinking about the distinction between assessing for content knowledge and assessing knowledge of the academic language to the content. Do you have any hints on how to design focused assessments for academic language without just resorting to matching terms with definitions?
Yeah, that's such a beast, isn't it? Honestly, for myself, that was kind of how I thought about the ADI model in general. So I used the lab report as a chance to assess their ability in that justification, especially the writing prompt is what science concepts are important for understanding this. And so sometimes if I was really looking for particular words or particular levels of understanding, I would make a little word bank and be please try to include these so I could see how they explained themselves, but within a particular context. So I kind of saw the lab report that they wrote as that, learning embedded or content embedded vocabulary assessment. And then I was able to use the checkout questions, which is more what we're talking about here for are you able to apply the content? Are you able to apply that vocabulary in novel situations? And those 2 pieces of the puzzle gave me information. That's not going to be you have your entire unit's worth of vocabulary. Obviously, you're not going to be able to get all of that in a ADI lab report or a checkout question. But I think the more we can keep it contextualized, the better building science vocabulary into these tasks as you're writing them that students are going to have to be able to understand in order to know what to do on the task part of the assessment is, I think, I mean, it's not necessarily matching level. Can you match a word in a definition? But if they can talk around the vocabulary or use those words, I think that can help. So in the part where they explain what they were thinking, if you look at that sample one, the section says explain your thinking, be sure to use what you know about, and then disciplinary core idea or cross-cutting concept to justify. I would try to have maybe an expectation or a conversation about the kinds of words that I'm hoping that they use and that they, put a box around those words as they use them or whatever it is, just to see what they're naturally coming up with.
Next question. Do you have any tips for making the timing to grade manageable, the time that it takes to grade things?
Yeah, I think for myself, so I, taught 7th grade, and I always did that thing where I would grade my first period's papers, and then I would grade everybody else's papers, and I'd have to go back and regrade first period's papers, which was just like a whole nother half-hour of grading because I didn't have it straight in my head what I wanted until I saw all of them, right? So I think the more that you can on your own, but even better with a peer, think through what that's going to look like before you get the papers in front of you, the better that's going to go. It's another thing that helped me a lot was building in more opportunities for peer review. Like I was saying, instead of having me be the first one to grade anything, having them then, fill it all out themselves and then show it to a partner and peer review it with a partner and figure out like, okay, what did you write that I didn't write before I got it? To me, that helped a ton because I was able to, I don't know, it wasn't me getting the first rough draft of it. I was able to get the kind of fixed up conversational part of it. And that seemed to be pretty good. That's a formative strategy, right? Like that's not what you want to do necessarily if it's a summative assessment, but I feel like summative assessment is so little of our time ideally. And so that formatively worked pretty well.
Okay, and last one here, kind of more of a comment. Open-ended assessments are great, but my kids have to take the STAR test at the end of the year, which is going to be multiple choice.
Oh yeah, okay. Okay, got it. Yeah, absolutely. Like kids are gonna, and the STAR test, that's Texas STAR test. Everybody has their own state test at the end of the year, regents or whatever. But your end of year test most likely is multiple choice. And if you're looking at all of those things I said about systemic bias and things not to do, almost all of those are going to be in there somewhere, right? Like they are not necessarily well-designed tests. We all know that. To me, it's a balancing act, but I think when we sway to, well, my kids are going to have to take this test, and so I should give them versions of this test all year so that they know what to look for. If that's the focus over, I'm going to give them well-designed tasks so that I know if they get the content or not, to me, that's where I personally wanted to spend my time. I wanted to know, can you do the thing? Do you understand the thing? I can teach you test taking strategies in a couple days. I can't teach you a year's worth of content in a couple of days. And so to me personally, and everybody lands on this wherever they will, but for me personally, having performance task assessments led to much better understanding of content ultimately and a better ability to navigate all the tricky stuff because I felt confident that they knew the science at least, or the whatever content you teach, math or science or whatever, they knew that. And so I didn't have to worry so much about the tricky stuff that we could do in a week or two before the test. Any other questions?
I don't think so, unless anybody has anything last minute they want to add.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. We are here for you. Feel free to reach out to Howdy at Argument Driven Inquiry with any questions. Find us on Twitter, find us on Facebook. But we'd love to hear from you about how you go out and implement this, how you're doing assessments for ADI or for anything. And thank you for coming. We'll close this down, but would love to see you in May. All right. Oh, Mary just asked if we have a Facebook group. Yes, we do. It is facebook.com/argument driven. And from there, you can get to our closed Facebook group, which is called Argument Driven Teachers, but you have to click on it or you can search it up, Argument Driven Teachers. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Y'all have a good afternoon.